Hello and welcome to the Oxygen Addict podcast. We're brought to you every week by our sponsors, precisionfuelandhydration.com. You can personalize your fueling and hydration strategy so you perform at your best with 15% off your first order of electrolytes and carbohydrate fuel with the code OA23 at precisionfuelandhydration.com. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm your host, Coach Rob Wilby, and every week we bring you an episode of this podcast to help motivate and inspire you. As you can see, I'm not joined this week by Coach Chris Palfreman. I am, in fact, joined by Andy Blow from Precision Hydration. Welcome aboard, Andy. How are you today?
Good, thanks, Rob.
Great to have you with us, mate. We're going to be chatting about the Ironman World Championships that happened out in Nice a couple of days ago as we're recording. Andy was there on the ground, so I thought who better to get the story from the horse's mouth, as it were. Now, before we kick this off with the interview, a couple of things you could do for us, actually, please. If you like this episode, if you could like and subscribe on either YouTube or the podcast player app that you're listening on, that really helps the growth of the show and helps it get shown to new people. And also, if you're looking for help and advice with your training for 70.3 and Ironman, please get in touch. You can email us at help@oxygenaddict.com, or there's a link in the show notes. And also, as you'll hear, if you're looking for help with your hydration, nutrition, and fueling, you'll be able to get in contact with Andy Blow from Precision Fuel and Hydration. So, Andy, the Ironman World Championships in Nice, then, it looked, certainly from the outside, from a guy who managed to catch, I don't know, I'm going to say I managed to catch about an hour of it spread out over the whole day on the different bits of video. It looked like a really well done World Championships. It looked like the crowds were fantastic on the run in particular. And it really felt as though the French crowds had embraced it all the way down the Promenade des Anglais. It looked like there was super thick crowds the whole way down, which from people I know who raced said it felt very different to Kona. So what was your experience of the event?
The event, as you say, Rob, was magnificent. It was done very, very well. The debate about Kona versus Nice aside, I think that Nice is a spectacular venue for that race. I think the course is awesome. The support is awesome. People have expressed mixed opinions on whether it's better to be in a place like Kona where the race effectively takes over the place, like it's a small town. Like I was in Nice for 8 days, and then on race day, I bumped into people who had been there for a week as well, and I hadn't seen them all week because it was so spread out. And a town like Nice kind of absorbs the race a little bit more. But yeah. I didn't feel that was a bad thing. I thought that was, it was quite kind of cool that there's people sunbathing on the beach, like 100 yards, having no idea what's going on, just next to this course where you've got all these amazing athletes absolutely like ripping themselves to shreds up and down the prom running a marathon, And like you say, the crowds were thick the whole way down. It was very cool.
Yeah. And it's also good. I think, there's always going to be the argument for Kona's where it was born, or Hawaii's where it was born. Kona's where it's been certainly since 1980, I think, since it moved there. It's got the heritage. It's got the soul of triathlon there, essentially. But if you listen to any of the pro interviews we've ever done, it suits a certain kind of athlete, doesn't it? The humidity, the heat. I know you yourself really, really struggled with the challenge of just overcoming the heat and the humidity out in Hawaii, and a world champs that moves around from year to year is going to suit a different kind of athlete, arguably.
Yeah. And the difference, it's been talked about a lot, but the difference in the dynamics of the bike course really made it what I thought was a way more exciting race. The fact that, okay, that may change a little bit over the years if Nice continues to host the event regularly and people get a little bit more used to the dynamics of the race. But clearly, if you throw a massive mountain into the middle of the ride and a couple of scary hairpin filled descents and that kind of stuff, you're going to open up the opportunity for a different style of racing. And that's exactly what we saw. It was like, and a lot of people again have said the same thing, but you have to say hats off to someone like Sam Laidlow for what he did there by taking advantage of that. I mean, he always throws down hard. He races to he is going to either win or blow spectacularly, and he won spectacularly. And he went off the front. He had us all on the edge of our seats for a very, very long time. The dynamic of that with Patrick Langer then, nibbling away at the lead on the run. And although it didn't never look like, obviously, if Sam kept it in control, Patrick wasn't going to catch him no matter how fast he ran. But there was always that kind of tension around, well, it only needs a little cramp or a little, he needs to pull up for a K, and then he'll be on him. It was totally exciting race.
And the other thing about that is, as they started the marathon, I looked at the times on paper. I think Patrick was 14 minutes down starting the marathon. And on paper, there was 14 minutes between their best marathons in an Ironman. Although ridiculous, though that sounds to say, he'd run just under 2:30, and Sam's best marathon at that point, I think, was a 2:44 still.
Yeah.
And so I was watching it thinking, well, all he's got to do, it's the classic Mark Allen against, was it Jürgen Zach who ran down and ran 13 minutes into him back in the day? And it comes down to the last couple of Ks shoulder to shoulder. So it didn't quite play out that way as it was, but it's a different kind of excitement, isn't it? Looking at it and thinking, well, the guy's 2 or 3 miles up the road at the start of the marathon, but knowing you've got Patrick Langer chasing you down, I think is a completely different kind of pressure, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, he's the runner in Ironman that everyone's measuring themselves against these days. And we obviously spent a lot of time with Leon Chevalier, who was fifth, which was an awesome result for him. We've worked with him for a number of years, and I think fifth was a huge, even though he's come sixth and seventh in St. George and in Kona, fifth definitely felt like a solid step forward with some of the scalps that he took and the way he raced the controlled race. But yeah, he ran with Patrick Langer for, I think, 2 or 3K when Patrick caught him and really got a feel, because Leon ran a 2:39 this time around, which was, he went from being the slowest runner in the top 10 in Kona to I think the second or third fastest runner in the top 10 in Nice. So, but yeah, hearing him talk about this, like, the speed at which Patrick was running and just like going along and experiencing that, and we were all seeing it play out in real time in front of us, because the splits on the Ironman tracker were very good. We were stood at the roadside, and of course they're coming around every 40 minutes or less, actually, because they're going out and back on the 10K loop. So it was very cool. And that, again, purely from a spectating on the ground point of view, that was a big advantage over Kona for me, was that they don't just disappear off and you have to go and find a TV somewhere or cycle up to the Queen K and, stand on the side of a baking highway. You could actually just see this thing happening.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? The thing that makes it harder for the athletes, I think a 4-lap run course is super hard mentally. Having done these back in the day, I've found it such a struggle that, like, firstly, 4 is such a hard number to run, but secondly, the fact that the coast kind of curves around, and when you do the turnaround at the airport, you can see I think there's a casino or something by the finish line with like a turret on, isn't it? You can see it, and it looks like it's on the horizon effectively. It's really, really a long way away, and it mentally just destroyed me. But the thing that's hard for the athlete is really good for the spectator. The fact that they're seeing them coming by essentially every 20 minutes in opposite directions.
Yeah, and I think, again, not everyone would agree that this is a good thing, and probably some of the pros in particular might have got annoyed by it. But you get, obviously, as the run wears on, you get age groupers on different laps, and so the run course fills up. And from an atmosphere point of view, that really builds things. It does make it tricky to see who's where and what's going on. But then these days with the trackers and things, it's a bit easier to keep tabs on that sort of thing. But we felt stood by the road that it was epic. And I'm not one for going and watching a lot of big sporting events, really. I enjoyed participating in big sporting events. Like, I'm not really a spectator, but on race morning, we were all up early, we were excited, and the whole thing basically delivered.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Leon Chevalier. I know you've been working with him for a few years now. You guys produced some really good YouTube videos in the run up to Nice with him in, showing some of the bike course and showing some of the climbs and the descents, which I know certainly athletes that we coach who were taking part found those super useful. What were Leon's reflections talking to him after the event, and what were his expectations going into it? Because it was one of those where I think arguably the race wasn't wide open, but there were rumors that, Jan was injured and the Norwegians not being there. It did feel as though it was perhaps a more open World Championships than it's been in other years, arguably.
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was going in, and honestly, my money was on Jan really before the
Mm.
race. If anyone asked, because I felt like, especially the Milwaukee thing was influential in that, because I knew that the guy is a thoroughbred champion, and I thought if he's putting himself on the line and he's just done that, then he feels he's got a chance. I'm also a good friend of mine, Lawrence Van Lingen, who's a sort of physical therapist and a biomechanics expert, has been working with Jan for a number of months, and he was saying how well he was moving, how well he was swimming, and we saw that in the swim. I mean, the guy led some of the swim, and I thought that was a good marker of intent, you know. But yeah, going back to Leon and his expectation and that, I think he met his expectation. I think he would have been dreaming like everyone who's close to the front would have been, that on their day they could have won. But the guy, he'd never run under 240 before. He did that. His previous best at World Championship was 6th. He got 5th. So for him, and he's a young guy, so I think he felt like he moved forward, and we spent a good sort of hour or two with him after the race, going back through his numbers to look at his fluid and carb and sodium consumption, so we could get all of that down for future reference, and just generally like chatting about the race dynamics. And when you look at his race, he's not the best swimmer, but he lost less time than he normally is. I think he lost about 3 minutes to the front, 3 and a bit minutes, and then very just sort of, as he does, very methodically started chipping his way through. I think he would have probably he rode up to Cam Worth, but then Cam got away from him, and I think Leon maybe felt that he was kind of hoping to ride a bit more with Cam, but he had a very solid ride. I mean, the numbers look scary because I think he came off the bike like 9 or 11, maybe it was 9. I can't remember. It was 9 or 11 minutes down, and when I know how fast Leon rides, and you think if that, and he said he went as hard as he could on the bike.
Yeah.
So that was, that shows you, but he kept his mental composure, and, essentially I think he came off the bike in 5th, gained 2 places effectively by overtaking people, but also lost 2 places by being overtaken or something like that. And then kind of ended up the same. And yeah, I definitely detected an element of satisfaction from him. And he is a man who is not easily satisfied with a performance. He's often his own harshest critic. So, and second Frenchman, I think there were 4 in the top 10, maybe, or 5 in the top 15 or something. So it was a really strong performance from them on home soil, as you'd have hoped.
And what was his experience of the, I don't want to say home turf advantage, but it does sound like the French who were there supporting really got behind the French athletes.
Yeah, they did. We were stood next to one of those really annoying people who had a massive air horn on the run, so we had to move after a while. But they were obviously French and going wild for all the French. There was definitely a huge roar of applause every time one of the French, especially when Sam came through, but any of the French athletes were getting a lot of very, very vocal support. The thing that trumped it though, for which was actually great to hear, was like Jan Frodeno got the loudest. It was like a Mexican wave of cheering where you knew when Jan was coming up the road, because everyone was going absolutely wild. And I think, obviously he didn't have anything like the race he would have liked to have done, but I genuinely do think that, looking at his face, he did enjoy elements of that run and did feel an amazing, amount of love from the supporters in his last race. That was really cool to see.
It's got to be hard, I think, in his position, having identified it as your last race, that there's a kind of all or nothing element to it, where when you get onto the run and it looks like you're not going to win. I know I've read an interview where he said, like, I was never going to not finish. And it looked like the crowd really got behind it. It was like a lap of honor almost, wasn't it?
I think that's what it was, really. I mean, when you think the guy like essentially cruised in for an 8:40 something on what is not a quick Ironman course. Yeah. It's like he'd have, yeah, we all know he came there to try and win, and he would have loved to have done that. But yeah, to sort of bow out gracefully in the way that he did is really impressive. And
yeah,
credit to
let's talk a little bit more about Sam Laidlow's performance then, because like you said, he's either going to win or he's going to come second or he's going to explode spectacularly. And I think he said in an interview I saw, he felt as though he was a little bit under the radar because of, having blown up recently and not having finished in an event or two. But the performance he put together in Kona was so impressive. that it's funny that anyone kind of discounted him in the lead up to it. It just looked as though everything went totally his way on the day, and he just, you know, rode away from the field on the uphill, and then he was gone and out of sight.
Yeah, I think that basically he's always said, and he always does run this high risk strategy. Like, he's prepared to tread the line. He wants to win, and he's prepared to do that in his own way, which means putting him out there for people to chase, to be hunted. Like, I've always, when I got races right myself, I always felt like I was racing conservatively and then pressing on later on and catching people or moving through. That always felt like a sensible and measured strategy to get the best out of yourself. And if you ended up coming second or third or whatever, it was because you were beaten by someone who, you know, had a better day or had more to give than you. Sam's attitude is very much so that he's going to go out, dominate, put it out there, see if he's got what it takes to win. Because if he's not got what it takes to win, he's happy to, like, you know, sack it off. And
yeah,
so very, very ballsy, you know, and people love to see that. Like, we all loved to see it. All the chat on the sidelines on the run, every time he came past was like, wow, this guy is still looking good. And when he gets into the last 10K and he's French and he's been very vocal about, this is his race, this is the one he wants to win. And everyone chat, you think this is going to take an actual, like, full implosion. The guy's going to have to basically die on the street if he's not going to win this race.
yeah.
And so, high risk, potentially high reward. The fact that he's done it twice in Kona and Nice now obviously shows that it's not a flash in the pan thing. So clearly, I don't think the last time we're going to see him throw a race down like that.
It was interesting to me that he can ride so well on such varied and different courses. Like, having ridden so well on the Kona course, and then the demands of the French course being so different, and you'd have thought, having been suited to a much, I don't want to say smaller athlete, but a lighter athlete. Now he's incredibly lean and incredibly thin, but he stands about 6'2", doesn't he? 6'1", 6'2".
Yeah.
I found it extraordinary that he rode as well as he did on that course and put so much time into everyone on the uphill.
I'd almost argue that it's the other way, in terms of, you know, he's grown up in that kind of environment in France. He's ridden in the mountains a lot, and so his skill factor is very high.
Yeah.
You'd almost be arguing that actually he doesn't have quite such a right to ride as well in, say, Kona, when it's much more of an aero, you know, tuck position thing. But maybe arguably it's easier to transfer your fitness and skills from the technical side of riding. If you can ride technical, but you do a lot of, you know, Zwift training, turbo training, whatever, in on the bars, and that you can transfer to riding a flatter, more aero-based course.
Yeah.
I think I would be surprised if he hasn't ridden that course a shitload of times, you know.
Yeah.
So really got to know it. Having been around the course with Leon as well, he's got the if you've got the technical ability on the climbing, actually, it's not super steep. So we saw Leon even in the recce pushing the big chain ring a lot of the time on the climbs, and I think that means that, you know, essentially, if you can sit back in the saddle in the seat, you're not having to get up. This isn't like really steep dancing on the pedals, hairpins, and like some of the stuff that we see in the Tour de France. This is like big, long, grindy climbs. So I think a time trialing ability transfers to that a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And he certainly looked, and they had the helicopter shots of him coming downhill. He looked so confident, so smooth, so skillful. There was never any element of him looking out of control. And just as you watch the good Tour de France descenders, that's exactly how he was, only in the aero bars, which was the thing that made me think, wow, he's got it totally dialed in.
Yeah, super impressive. I mean, all of the guys at the front end, I don't think I saw anyone who looked. I was only watching that on the Ironman footage, obviously, but it looked like, yeah, there was a lot of chat about Camworth being, you know, a proper bike rider and therefore being significantly better than these guys. But I think the triathletes actually showed that a lot of them are more capable technical bike riders than maybe they get credit for.
Yeah, very much so. So what else did you see on the ground then that perhaps athletes, people watching at home wouldn't have seen?
I But I suppose I don't know whether he's been vocal about it. I actually just happened to bump into Joe Skipper the day after the race.
Okay, so yeah, so I've got no
Joe
idea
had
what happened to Joe. I know
Yeah, Joe had a shocker, unfortunately. Like I think he said to me, he got to the top of the first climb, the big climb on the bike, and he'd lost 15 minutes, yet he'd been pushing awesome bike power. And he felt like he's had some kind of yet to be defined mechanical problem, like some kind of resistance on the bike, be it a bearing or a disc or something. I don't even know what, but basically he felt like he was pushing against artificially high resistance because his power
Okay.
numbers were good, but he was just hemorrhaging time. I think he came off the bike like 33 minutes down.
Oh,
Uh,
what a shame.
and then he did set off extremely fast on the run, and we thought, oh, Joe's going to, he's clearly not going to get up to a meaningfully great position, but he is going to throw down a great marathon and shows what he can do there. But he sort of said to me when I bumped into him that he thinks that because he blew up in the second half of the run and feels like he went off a bit hard, but B, probably his head went towards the end of the bike, not taking up on enough calories, not taking enough fluids. So he was probably going to go pop anyway. So I think he just had a really difficult day. And Joe, it was quite, you know, yeah, it was a tricky conversation with him, really, in the sense that I almost didn't know what to say to the bloke other than that, you'll be back. But
Mm.
you could see he was a disappointed man. He said he's probably going to pop out to do Clearwater, I think, in November, maybe salvage something at the end of the season and use his fitness. But as you would expect from a man who people were talking about as a potential, certainly a top tenner and a potential podium prospect, that result was not going to
Mm.
leave him feeling very happy. Um,
It's yeah, something unusual's happened there, hasn't it? For someone to be feeling like they're riding well, someone who knows the bike as well as Joe does, to be pushing really good numbers and find he's lost so much time on the climb. Yeah, that must have been heartbreaking for the guy.
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And did you
Uh,
hear anything on the ground about the situation with Braden Curry, with him being told? Apparently, he was told out on the course he'd been disqualified for intentional littering, and I guess he dropped something accidentally. He argued with the ref, and then he said his head went. He got to T2. He wasn't going to continue. Then he did, and he ran the marathon, and then appealed at the end of the race, and they overturned the DQ. So he ended up finishing, but I think he finished 12th, 13th, something like that.
Yeah, I didn't actually speak to him, but we saw it happening. I mean, he was a guy who obviously went out with a lot of good intent in the swim. He was trailing the lead at one point and really looking strong. And I thought Braden, maybe he's on for a really good one here because he's a kind of a strong, experienced guy that you'd expect to thrive on a bike course like that. He then had this problem with his tri-suit not doing up, which was clearly stressing him out in the early miles, and that was flapping around. The littering issue. I don't have any more insight on that one other than that, and it's not on exactly the same issue, but I know that there was a lot of chat in the pro athlete briefing about the rules and particularly about this like crossing the center line rule. There was a lot of kind of back and forth towards the end of that meeting. They actually tried to resolve it, and in the end, I think had to kind of close it off without what sounded like not a fantastically clear resolution on what they were going to do about this crossing the centre line business. So,
Mm.
as ever, there's arguing about drafting or centre lines or littering and DQs and things is unfortunately continues to just be a feature of pro triathlon at that level. And it is I feel for the organisers and the pro athletes because both are in a very difficult position. Clearly need to learn from incidents and make strides, but it's a very difficult environment in which to operate. The race organisers trying to keep everyone safe, but also the pro athletes clearly want to race as fast as they can. And yeah, I mean, I guess things like the littering penalties and things that they ought to be easier to police and ought to be easier to
Mm.
manage.
Yeah,
And
you
I
think so,
didn't
wouldn't you?
the incident, but that to me feels like a bit of a needless one in some respects. But I don't know. I'm sure more and more will come out over that as time goes on because to Braden's point, what is devastating is even if it gets overturned or even if you only get a warning or something, it can completely change the mental dynamics of the race for you.
Yeah,
You
and,
think
and
one thing
absolutely has done for him, hasn't it? Getting that penalty at 110k, your head goes for the last 70k on the bike, and then It's hard enough running a marathon when you're feeling good and you're motivated, let alone with that hanging over you.
Yeah, yeah, there was definitely, like, I think after the pro race briefing, there was a bit of an air of disgruntlement about some of that. But again, how unusual that is at those big races, I'm not sure. The day before the race, people's tensions are, or a couple of days before the race, everyone's tensions are running high. No one likes uncertainty. The organisers have got a lot of priorities to balance. But I think overall, what I will say from where I stood, it looked like the organisation pulled off in the macro aspects, they pulled off a really good event. Just talking to some of the guys from Ironman about the constraints they have to work under gives you a bit of an appreciation for how tough it is, because they've got very little time to put everything up and on the prom and take it all down again, because that's a major thoroughfare in the city. And, they worked some pretty tight deadlines, and they put up a very impressive amount of infrastructure in a short space of time. And as a spectator in the crowd, the way their flows worked, the security worked and stuff, we always felt like we could basically get to the places that we wanted to see the action from. It was a good spectator experience. In many respects, I would say it's a superior spectator experience than going and watching Kona.
And what were the athletes' reflections afterwards from the ones you spoke to when they've compared Nice and Kona? What were their feelings on that?
I went to a talk with one of Jack Kelly did some talks with athletes and people, and he interviewed Max Newman, who obviously wasn't racing, but he asked him straight up about the different, his feeling between Nice and Kona. And for Max, it was very interesting. He was quite categoric that it was all about Kona for him. Other people seem to have either a completely different view, that it's a world championship, doesn't matter where it is, like in other sports, it's a world title. I reckon on balance, more people, certainly, and I think certainly on the age group side, more people would be in favour of their personal dream is to race Kona. And I think the only way that we're going to overcome that is by allowing Nice or wherever it is a few years to build its own legacy, because the legacy of Kona took a long, long time to be built. Nice, in triathlon, if you are a hardcore triathlete, if you've been involved in the sport a long time, you know that Nice, Roth, and Kona are probably the three biggest events in people's minds. They're three of the biggest bucket list events. And if you give these things time to develop, then maybe they generate their own myth and legend and legacy. And in 20 years' time, people will be talking about, have you done Nice, rather than have you done Kona?
Yeah.
That would be, I think we have, if doing Kona is unrealistic, which it seems to be, then as much as a lot of us have nostalgic memories or kind of feelings towards that place, have the ability to let that go and actually allow an event to build itself up in a different location is the next step. And Nice, the good thing about Nice is that it's clearly going to be able to absorb a lot of people over a lot of years and not really blink. We found, at the last minute, a week before we came out, we had to get some extra accommodation, and we found some very reasonably priced accommodation within a K of the start. That doesn't happen in Kona. So,
yeah.
There are significant advantages.
And there's also, I think, the element of, firstly, France has got the history and the culture of embracing cycle racing, which arguably America, Hawaii has much less history of embracing that side of it. So there's that. And the second thing is that back in 1978, back in 1980, we're going back sort of 45, nearly 50 years now. The world has changed a lot in that time. And recently I was trying to take my 11-year-old son out for a bike ride, and we went for a couple of miles. And by the time we got off the main road, he'd had enough. And he said, I hate this. There's all these cars around me. And I was saying, it's okay. We're going to get to the quiet roads. And he's like, but we're going to have to go on main roads wherever we go. This is horrible. I hate it. Let's go back to the mountain bikes and go on the off-road trails. I guess us growing up in the late 70s, early 80s with much quieter roads, cycling was a different thing. When Kona started over there, it was a different thing 40 odd years ago. Now you're trying to close down a town where every household owns 2, 3, who knows, 4 cars. It closes the roads off. Maybe there's the history aspect of it, but maybe it just doesn't carry on into the future as well, as we would like the legacy to think it carries it forward into the future, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, when we did the recce with Leon on the bike, it made me feel for the first time in years like I really wanted to ride my road bike again. And if I lived there, I would absolutely do it. I would do two things that I don't currently do all the time: is swim in the sea most days and ride my road bike, because that little place is an absolute paradise for it. So, getting the opportunity to then race there would is really cool. The drivers are a lot more respectful, even though the roads in and around the edges of town are very, very busy. There's a lot more respect for cyclists. There's a lot more bike paths and stuff where you can get around. And then once you get out on the course, people will give you a decent amount of, they'll give you amount of room when they overtake and that sort of thing. So it's culturally it is really strong. It's also, there's also that history with the Nice race itself, but also just up the road. We drove on the way down, we drove down to Nice and we drove through Avignon, which is obviously where the first short course world champs were. I think it was in 1989, wasn't it? And look at the way the French Grand Prix triathlon thing has been churning out really good athletes and accepting athletes from different countries and developing them as part of that super competitive series for a lot of years. So all of those signs to me mean that, France feels like if there is a legitimate successor to taking over from Kona and being a place that can, that has the authenticity to host a triathlon world championships, then it is there. So for me, and then I have to recognize my own bias in the fact that as someone who's still connected with the sport, and it's a 2-hour flight for me to get there, you can fly in, catch a tram down the prom and be at your accommodation within, like door to door, leaving home is probably less than half a day. It's fantastic. And that's a lot for that's the same experience for pretty much anyone in Europe, because you can connect to Nice really easily. So yeah, as I say, there's a bunch of reasons why, even though I feel a very, very strong affinity to Kona myself, I kind of feel like we want to give Nice a chance to show that it can be a decent venue for this. And the first outing, I think people will chalk up as a relative success.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think it's going to be 3 or 4 2-year cycles of having the race established there. It's going to be 6 years, 8 years before people stop thinking, well, it used to be like this and now it's like this, and it just becomes, this is how it is. It's inevitable, isn't it? It was the same when they brought the 70.3 World Championships in. We're 3 years into it before people really embraced it, I think. So yeah, that's good.
Remember the controversy about the 70.3 name? Everyone was convinced, like, what the hell is that? And is that ever going to stick? And it's part of the lexicon now, isn't it? I do just feel like sometimes you need to give these things, need to give these things a bit of time.
Yeah, 100%. Hey, so listen, tell us, I've seen on some photos from my athletes who were there, and I've seen on your social media, you obviously had something up your sleeve, and I had a text from Dave at PF&H a couple of days before the race and said, hey, we got something new up our sleeves, watch this space, kind of thing. So you guys launched a new product while you were out there, and the clips I saw on social media look like it went great. So tell us all about it. Tell us about the new product and tell us what's behind you developing it.
Yeah, for sure. So we've just brought this new product out called Flow Gel, and the concept behind Flow Gel is really very simple. It's primarily designed for triathletes, because what we've observed since bringing out our gels a couple of years ago is, and going back many years, I even used to do this myself. People squeeze 8, 10, 12 gels out into a water bottle for an Ironman, so they've got a very concentrated amount of calories that they can then work through. It's a sticky process. It's quite wasteful. You're throwing away loads of packaging. You're adding water to it because it's a bit too viscous and it doesn't come out the bottle very well. But it's kind of the best of a bad solution, though, because it's better than trying to open 10 or 12 individual gels on the move, especially on a hilly course like Nice. When we were making our gel, we used pectin as a gelling agent, something to make it set. And we figured out as part of the process that by changing the process, we can make the gel more or less viscous or more or less set without changing any of the ingredients. So Flow Gel, really simply, is a large bag. In this case, the one we brought out is 300 grams, which is 10 servings of a single gel in a pouch with a spout. You get a clear bottle with a graduated scale on the side, so you can basically pour the gel in. The gel's engineered so that it does flow better. It's less viscous and thinner than our regular gel. You pour it into that bottle, and then as you're on the bike, you can see how much you've consumed. Really simple. So, we're taking all the faff out of that process. So it's not rocket science. It is just a really clean and simple kind of no mess, no faff solution for a problem that a lot of triathletes are facing. We've also got soft flasks coming for it. So you can carry either 120 grams or 300 grams of carbs in one soft flask on the run. So you can either use that for the run of a long distance tri, or we're suggesting as well it's going to be useful for ultra distance runners, I think. So we've done loads of testing with athletes on our ambassador, some of our senior ambassadors. We had the first few bottles of it go out in Nice, and we actually had a few athletes using it on course as well. So yeah, the reception to the concept has been phenomenal, and now we're sort of eagerly awaiting the wider feedback from people as they test it in anger. I think to tell you how keen people are, we've had a bunch of people trying to contact us because it's on pre-order at the moment, and we're shipping it as soon as the major production run arrives towards the end of the month. There's a lot of people who've got one or two races left this year who are super keen to get hold of it. So our DMs on Instagram have been rather full with sort of people pulling out our heartstrings, trying to see if they can get a special delivery of just one bottle for X, Y, or Z race. So we're doing whatever we can to try and meet some of those requests.
That's a really good idea. It's great on two levels. The first one is from the ecology point of view, cutting the top off 20 different gel packets to try and squeeze them into a bottle, much better for the environment. But it's so much less hassle if you can just put something from one big sachet into a bottle than it is trying to water ones down and mix it up and stuff. I think it sounds like if it's as good as you say it is, I think it'll be a real winner with triathletes.
Yeah, I think so. We've also had a few gravel racers approach us about it already, because a lot of times you have to be more self-sufficient in a very long gravel bike race. So maybe you can use one of these bottles on your frame and have a whole another 300-gram pouch in your back pocket, which you then just refill. And there's really is no faff then. Because we know in a gravel race it can be really difficult to take your hands off the bars to open a gel at certain points. So I can see a lot of diverse uses for it, and yeah, kind of can't believe that no one's done it before to this point. But there you go.
I was thinking back when I first started in the sport back in 2002. I think there was one gel manufacturer back then used to make you could mix it yourself at home, and it was a great idea, and then it disappeared. And I think it's the economics of selling single servings, isn't it, rather than let people do it themselves. So good on you guys for solving that problem again for people.
Yeah, well, I think we're trying to innovate, and I think innovation in the nutrition space, a lot of people focus on trying to find a sort of flashy sounding, scientific sounding new ingredient. Our stance, Rob, it's always been, you need three things when you're racing. You need carbs, you need fluid, you need sodium. The amount of those varies from person to person, but they're the basic building blocks of a sound nutrition racing strategy. You need to get the amounts right. Where people are wasting a lot of energy potentially on looking at weird and wonderful new ingredients or wacky flavors or that kind of thing, we're trying to address now the problem of, okay, well, how do you hit the numbers that you want to hit? How do you carry 300, 400, 500 grams of carbohydrate for the entire bike ride? Like Leon carried all of his nutrition for the entire bike ride on his bike to minimize any chance of screw ups. He picked up water on the course, and that was about it. I think he picked up a few extra gels on the run because he upped his carb intake. But I mean, I've got his numbers now, and he took 116 grams of carb an hour in that race.
Wow.
On the bike, he carried it all himself, because he used super concentrated bottles. And I think that, as we see more people want to go down that route of being self-sufficient and not rolling the dice, having to pick stuff up, a product like this should be more useful. I do think that the future in making sports nutrition work better has got less to do with, there'll always be marginal improvements in ingredients and those kind of things, but there's this kind of interface problem between getting that gel into the athlete or getting that drink into the athlete. We still use kind of despite all the bike technology, and I know there are some integrated drinking systems and things like that, but they often fail. They're often not brilliant. It's very old school. I walked past Transition and looked, and I saw lots of cable ties, lots of gaffer tape, lots of elastic bands strapped onto bikes that cost £15,000, you know, because no one's really figured out those nuances yet. And so this is our first little foray into sort of saying, well, we're going to try and solve some of these physical, logistical problems for athletes with their nutrition, as much as providing them with really good nutrition products.
It's something we often get from athletes approaching their first Ironman. They fill out the race planning document we give them and they go, hang on a minute, I've worked out that I need, you know, whatever it might be, 60 grams of carbs an hour for 6 hours. How am I going to carry 360 grams of carbs on the bike? What? How does that work? If you've got a product that like this is really simple to use and makes things much easier, I think you've removed a massive barrier for athletes straight away. If they can carry their own energy and just get water at an aid station, it removes so many possibilities for things to go wrong for them.
Yeah, definitely, because we all know what happens if you miss, you know, if you miss a feed or something like that, it might not bite you in that hour, but it's going to bite you in the subsequent hours. I think Nice is a particularly pertinent example of that as well, because clearly if you're doing 70 k's an hour on the descent, you're not going to be having a lot of time to take your hands off the bars and eat and drink. So you've got to be very strategic, and you've got to be able to take those opportunities when they arise to eat and drink something, rather than have to wait, you know, and let it pass you by. So I think, and going back to Leon briefly, I think that's where he did a fantastic job. He was able to manage his nutrition because he knew the course, because he prepped, because he was carrying everything. It's all part of those sort of, everyone, you know, to an extent, quite rightly, everyone focuses on just how fit these guys and girls are and how they can push the big watts and all the rest of it. But what they don't necessarily see, because it's a little bit behind the scenes, is the level of detail of that prep that makes that performance possible, nutrition being a big part of that. So there is actually a really good, it's a little bit out of date in the sense he was talking about a different race, but on GTN, if people who are listening to this follow and watch GTN, they did a really good breakdown with Leon of how he carries all the nutrition on his bike, which I think is a pretty valuable resource. And if they go to the case studies pages on our own website, precisionfuelandhydration.com, you can also get a few insights into that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important to bring it to light, because I'm always saying to our athletes, look, Ironman is an energy limited event more than it's a fitness limited event. And often the people who get the best performance out are not the ones who are the fittest, but they're the ones who get the best balance of their fitness and their fueling to create their performance. It's not just about being as fit as you can be. You're often much better giving away 10 or 20% of that preparation to think about how, and practicing the how of the fueling, the hydration and the electrolytes, and getting all of that right so it works for you. Yeah, that's really good, mate. Cool. Well, listen, I think we've just about run out of time for today. So thank you very much for joining us, Andy. There's tons of stuff there. I'll stick a link in the show notes for Precision Fuel and Hydration, where athletes can book straight through to have a call with you or the team and discuss their needs, if they're racing in the heat or they're racing long distance. I know those calls that our athletes have had have been really, really useful. Before we wrap this up, there's a couple of discount codes and deals for the listeners at precisionfuelandhydration.com. You can use the code OA23 for 15% off your first electrolyte order. And if you're looking for help with your triathlon coaching this year, at teamoxygenaddict.com, I think we've got the most comprehensive endurance sports coaching program for busy age groupers. We'd love to have a chat with you about how we can help you out reach your goals in the coming season. So if that sounds good, there's a link in the show notes that books straight through to my calendar, and we can see whether you'd be a good fit for the team and how we can best help you out. Andy from Precision Fuel and Hydration, thanks very much for taking the time out of your busy day to come on and chat us through the Ironman World Championships, mate. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, always lovely to chat with you, Rob, and thanks for the invite.
Thanks, man. So remember, guys, there's links in the show notes. You don't have to remember them. And until next week, have a great, safe training and racing week. I'm Coach Rob Wilby, and you've been listening to the Oxygen Addict Podcast.